Welcome back to Questing Beast. I am Ben. Today we're looking at A True Relation of the Great Virginia Disastrum, 1633 by Ezra Clavery. Or Clavery? Hopefully I'm saying his name correctly. It is a box set put out by Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and it is a huge, perhaps a masterwork or a masterpiece by Lamentations in terms of getting its vision of role-playing and of the setting that it has kind of hinted at over the course of many adventures and putting it all into one giant product that you can play for a long period of time. Now, what do I mean by that? There's been a lot of really great books that Lamentations has put out over its history. One of my favorites is Veins of the Earth, for example. But a lot of my favorite books are really not in Lamentations' official setting. Its official setting is set during the early modern period and focuses a lot on cosmic horror, body horror, aliens, other dimensions, time travel, just general weirdness happening in Earth's relatively recent history. And this book takes all of those tropes and compacts it into one huge campaign. You could play this over the course of weeks or months, and you'll get a tour of what makes Lamentations Lamentations. For quite a long time, I've thought that LotFP really needed a product like this. It has a lot of short kind of one-shots, two-shots, three-shots, little adventures that are set in this early modern period, but no big campaign that you can really sink your teeth in, and now it finally has one. Rather than being set in Europe, like a lot of Lamentations products, it is set in Jamestown in the New World. So there's just a small European settlement there, and weird stuff, of course, is happening in Virginia, and you are going to set out into this hex crawl and investigate. It comes in 3 books. Volume 1 is Jamestown and Environs. Volume 2 is New Lands, which kind of describes the environment around Jamestown and some of the weird dimensions you can travel to. Volume 3 is spells, as well as more monsters and an index. This also comes with a referee screen, I'll show you that in a second, and a whole bunch of maps. Now, this deluxe box set that James sent me is a limited edition. I think there's only like 300 of them, and it's quite expensive, but you can get it for much cheaper if you opt to just buy the hardcover books without the slipcase and all of the extras. And of course, you can get the PDF, and that's even cheaper. Links are down in the description below. All right, let's dig into all of these books, but first, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by One Last Fight, a roguelike card-based RPG from Hitpoint Press, now live on Kickstarter. In One Last Fight, up to 4 players will journey to defeat their final nemesis or die trying. This is a storytelling game where you embark on a new journey every time you play. You will create your adventurers' backstories together, build the story of your nemesis, and work to overcome a gauntlet of challenges and moments. Campaign backers will have access to rewards such as expansion content, t-shirts, dice bags, life counters, and more. Check it out on Kickstarter using the link below. All right, what have we got inside the box set itself? Well, the box is actually quite nice. You can see the whole title on the side there. It's all cloth bound. There's gold stamped foiling on the covers of everything. It's very coherent looking in terms of its art design. We get lots of stuff inside here. For example, we have a pad of character sheets for Lamentations. That's perfect. We have an exploration log for when you are doing your hex crawling. We have 2 different maps, actually. I think one of these is for players. One of them is for the game master. Let's open this up here. The map is nice and big. Here is Jamestown right here on Chesapeake Bay. And you can see that there is a hex crawl that covers quite a large area. We have random tables for within the village, what the villagers want, village generators, because you can come across lots of different Native American villages that you can explore and interact with. There's a lot of marked locations scattered around here, though of course in the player version, those are removed. Over near the top, we have this giant hexagonal area, which is the warp, the weird zone that's been caused by aliens intersecting the Earth. And that's where a lot of the highest strangeness is going to be taking place. Another nice thing is that the back of this map is a totally blank, unkeyed map. So you could always have this handed out to the players and they could fill it in as they discover stuff. So that's pretty neat. Here we have the little GM screen. It has 4 panels. It's pretty low, so it's very easy to see over. And again, the art design is really pretty and really gets you in the correct headspace. The interior side is absolutely packed with useful information that a game master is going to need. So random encounters, Disastrum life, that's the weird mutated stuff that you'll be running into. New people reactions within the villages that you can discover and how to generate those. We have a whole section here for a master miscast table if you're using the miscast spell rules. And there is a lost table for what happens when you are lost while exploring. All right, let's see what we get inside our very first book, Jamestown and Environs. This is a Lamentations book in terms of its book quality, which means it is very, very solid. The binding feels really awesome. It's all stitch bound. It's almost an unbreakable binding. You can actually take it and you can just bend it way past flat and it'll be totally fine. The paper quality is unusually thick, maybe almost too thick. It almost feels like cardstock. And that could just be because it has this kind of paper texture printed onto it. So there's a lot of color on every page, although the illustrations are all black and white. So you might just need thicker paper to handle that. So this book offers a event-based scenario, a wilderness point crawl, a space warp crawl, and a source book for a 1633 Virginia in the midst of colonization of two kinds, the colonization of North America by Europeans and the colonization of Earth by castaways from the fifth dimension. It assumes an adventuring party including at least one spellcaster and composed of either a large number of low-level characters, like 1st to 3rd, or a small number of level 5th to 8th characters. Lots of adventure hooks for how you ended up here. Perhaps you were shipwrecked. Perhaps you were part of a anti-English diplomacy mission sent by Spain to turn the Powhatan Confederacy against the English. Perhaps you're here to head inland and loot all sorts of dead cities of all of their gold, which is rumored to be true. Probably not actually true. You might be an indentured servant, or you might have one of the hooks related to Dr. Trefusis, who is, well, there's not even just one of these guys, there's actually 3 of them. This is part of the temporal and parallel universe weirdness going on here. There's actually 3 of these guys who, unbeknownst to each other, are now wandering around in this setting, perhaps interfering with each other. This guy is an alchemist and a magician, and his experiments and his tinkering are causing all sorts of problems. So what's been happening in Virginia behind the scenes? Why is there this huge warp that is altering space-time near the Jamestown colony? It's ultimately because several hundred years ahead of when this setting takes place, in China, a sorcerer accidentally calls down aliens from the 5th dimension. These aliens crash land on Earth, possess the bodies of a whole bunch of people near the Great Wall of China, and start building an enormous antenna to reach back home to call for help. While doing this, they annihilate almost all life on Earth at that time period. But their spacecraft, which is damaged, starts floating backwards in time and ends up in Virginia, causing the warp. As part of the spatial distortions, at the center of the warp, there are actually now portals to 12 different alternate dimensions. So if you actually reach there, you can explore those. We have a timeline of the colony, which mostly corresponds to our history. So it's a nice little history lesson. So you know how Jamestown was founded, the different trials and tribulations that they've been through, and their relationships to the native peoples nearby. We have a great rundown of how society works inside the colony. You have planters, servants, slaves, and Indians are the kind of main classes, and talks about how they relate to one another. Here's a map of the Jamestown fort itself, which is going to be your base of operations as you set out on a hex crawl. We have lots of different personalities that you can encounter here. They'll have really great punchy descriptions that really stick in your brain and make them easier to run. Plenty of random tables to help flesh things out. You got news, there's rumors, different colonist names that you can combine to create all sorts of different names, different belongings that they might have, and lots of scripture verses, of course, which are all from Lamentations, because things are not so great in the Jamestown colony, but you can have scripture verses that people are spouting all the time. Comes with a sample plantation that you can use because there's plenty of plantations surrounding the fort that people use to grow the crops that they need for living. Most of it is tobacco, because that is the big cash crop in that time period. The master of this plantation is Dr. John Trefusis. He's not aware that a second alternate version has come through the warp and is exploring the surrounding area, and that a third one has arrived in London from another dimension. One of the main reasons why he is obsessed with magic, and especially necromancy, is he is trying to revive his dead wife and has recently set out for the warp in order to try and do that. There's plenty of weird artifacts all throughout the book. For example, this bone whistle, which if you blow, creates this, or summons, I suppose, this weird entity that burrows itself into your ear and talks to you, so only you can hear it. And if you do the right rituals, it will store objects for you, including really large, heavy ones. So that's a great way to loot things in the wilderness and be able to take them home again. Here's a section on the native peoples in the area. Basically, you have the Powhatan Confederacy, and you also have the Monacan people. We have maps of what their buildings were like, how their languages functioned, what their society was like, their clothing, and so forth. It does point out that we don't actually today know a whole lot about these cultures in terms of how their language worked and how their names worked, because that just wasn't really recorded and it's gone extinct since then. So it recommends that when you have names for them, you just use the names of deeds that they have done, since that was their tradition, and just have those translated into English, like calling a guy, "he has stolen a cannon," for example. Virginia NPCs. So here's plenty of people that you can encounter. You can just read straight across. Let's pick someone here. We have Christian, aka he has healed the chief. He's a Powhatan Indian, and he speaks Powhatan, English, and Monacan. He's a 5th level cleric. His goal is to understand Jesus' self-sacrifice. His secret is that despite granting the powers of Jesus, he continues to believe in Powhatan cosmology. His vice is that he's overconfident, and his look is that he brings a dancer's grace to everyday movements. All of these are really great descriptions. They're short, they're easy to remember, and they're very vivid. Travel and random encounters. So we start looking at how the warp really functions here. These are the larger hexes. They're about 7 miles across. The yellow area is the shadow of the warp, where things get a little bit weirder. The pink is the threshold of the warp, where there's even more weirdness is more likely to come up. The gray area in the center is the warp itself, which is zoomed into right here. This itself has a number of layers. You have the Stranger Forest, then you have the Seer Forest, the Furnace Forest, and then the Eye itself. There's lots of possible random encounters, and who you meet is going to depend on where you are, because as I said, if you get closer to the warp, things get weirder. You could just meet Powhatan hunters, or colonists, French Catholic priests, Dr. Trephysus, number 1, because that's the number which one you're running into, lawless planters and servants, different kinds of dangerous beasts, new people. These are some of the servants of the aliens that have escaped their craft and taken on weird human-like forms. Disastrous life, different types of monsters. Those are described in a lot more detail in the 3rd book, which is the bestiary. There's also omens and oddities that you might see in the sky, and things might actually start falling from the sky as well. So for example, seen in the sky, a hole in the sky shows a star-forming region of a nebula. By night, this sheds more light than a full moon. In the foreground, flashes of pinpricks of light, a battle in space. If anyone casts a spell of communication, perception, or detection directly upon the fleets, roll a d6. A multifaceted window in the sky reveals a binary star system, or less than 1,000 feet above their heads, the sky appears to droop. Or a luminous 3-dimensional projection shows a 4-dimensional scene. Falling from the sky might be any number of creatures, fish, birds, and so forth, or it might be duplicates of D4 adventurers who die on impact. There's also just general hazards that can be caused by the warp, like a cold slick, electrostatic squall, or fast times where time seems to speed up in one particular area. Now, volume number 2 is the heftiest of the 3, because this is the bulk of the material on what is in these hexes, where are all the places you can go, what can you discover there, and what are the other dimensions that you can travel to. These weird locations include things like Village of the Spirit Snail, which is a Monacan village, which is being invaded by giant ghostly snails. It could be the Trees of Flesh and Amber, which have a lot of great body horror of these trees that try to duplicate the players. You might meet the second Trephysus, although it might not be obvious immediately that he is the second one. You might think he's the original one from Virginia. Will he realize that something is wrong, that he's not in his homeworld anymore? This can be an interesting social encounter to play out. It could be your first indication that there are other dimensions to travel to. The Speaking Swamp, a swamp that you can communicate with through a whole bunch of woodland creatures, and which can provide a lot of great benefits. You might meet the Murder Cypress, which creates illusions of companions near its base, which seem like they're in pain or injured, luring you in close and then killing you, but with a number of bears and wolves that it has under its control. There are quite a few locations where you can create weird objects that can be very useful throughout your travel. So this is the Factory Fungus, which can create things like the Far Looker or the Far Talker or the Flesh Cutter or the Inside Looker if you want to stare inside a human being. Acquiring these weird tools and using them in effective ways is part of the puzzle, and it's something that I really enjoy. There's just some fun, weird animals like this huge centipede-like bear that's very polite and wants you to tell stories to it, but also wants to eat one of you. Another great tool-like encounter is the Fabricator, which if you find it, you can use and harness to create virtually anything that you can think of if you plan things out correctly and you roll properly. You could even create enormous amounts of gold, though of course, how are you going to take that home with you? Another object called the Transcriptor you can use to create new bodies and transcribe minds into them. So you can duplicate your own mind or duplicate the mind of someone else that you've met, all sorts of weird possibilities with that one. So the Furnace Forest is one area where the lensing effect caused by the warp is burning a whole section of a forest, a big ring area of the forest, just torching it, especially during the day, so it can only be traversed during the night. But within this area is the space lock. So this is the airlock into the interdimensional ship, but the ship is in 5 dimensions. What this airlock does is it allows you to slowly move up dimensions one at a time, so that the 3rd dimension is not intersecting the 5th dimension directly. If you do get the 3rd dimension to touch the 5th dimension, very bad things can happen. But when you're in this 4th dimensional intermediate space, you are now able to see inside objects. A person inside the space lock can see inside the pockets and inside the flesh of nearby comrades. Likewise, one can look inside one's own volume. In the brains of spellcasters, now laid out in exploded diagram views, prepared spells appear threaded amongst the neurons like luminous downy worms. Magnitude of the glow indicates the relative spell level, but nothing otherwise distinguishes them from one another. So you can actually reach into a spellcaster's head and pull out the spells that they've prepared. That is so cool. The blistered forest is a ring of forest around the center of the warp, where the forest has turned into these kind of like alien life, these big lumpy shapes that you can travel through. You're inside these kind of caverns that are above ground, and you are walking through them one at a time and exploring and trying to get to the other side, which will take you into the center of the warp. This is effectively an enormous dungeon crawl. There is kind of a little mini one that's laid out here with plenty of room descriptions and weird encounters inside, but there's also a generator that you can use to generate even more of these rooms as players come back again to explore once more, because this thing goes on for miles and miles. Things can get very weird, like you could find human corpses or egg masses or mouths on the floor, the den of wax. If you cast enough spells here, the blistered forest will actually absorb them and can possibly awaken, and you can talk to it and it may grant you a boon. This is Lamentation, so usually poking stuff leads to bad outcomes, but every once in a while you actually gain a lot of benefits from exploring. Once you get to the center of the warp, you're in this small hex, I guess at the very, very center. And as you walk around the exterior of this hex, looking towards the center, you see like this kind of tunnel of warp space leading to another dimension. And as you walk around, it shifts to different places. So there's 12 different locations, kind of corresponding to the different numbers on a clock. As you walk around, you can see through the tunnel and kind of figure out where you're going to go. Some of these places are really fun. There could be the Post-Ant Empire, an alternate Earth where the nations of biomechanical post-ants displaced the dinosaurs and have ruled ever since. These ants can be harvested for a lot of their precious metals, but you will deal with more and more waves of these increasingly horrifying biomechanical ants. Our Chiral Yesterdays is a portal to the day before. You can only do this twice in one day, but that means for every 24 hours, you can go back 48 by going through this loop over and over again. You can slowly travel into the past and possibly affect causality pretty significantly. Fortress of the Orphan Flame looks like normal Virginia, except that it has been invaded by a being that has been going back and eating people's histories. So the Virginia colony is now overrun with people frantically attacking one another and accusing one another of being strangers or infiltrating their lives because they don't remember them being there before. Tailings of the Moat World, where you can meet these little spark-like aliens from the distant future. They're kind of like teenagers that have come back to Earth to investigate a now desolate Earth and are very curious about who you are, and they want to investigate your whole life. The Gifting Night, an alternate world where shadowy creatures every night leave gifts for you, and if you touch them, then they can attack you. This has affected how the whole culture of humans works on this whole planet, and you had better figure that out quick, or you're going to be in trouble. The City of the Crawling Blood. This is an alternate world in England where John Trephysis has cast a spell that has summoned the Crawling Blood, this kind of weird, gooey, otherworldly entity that has infected most of London, turned them into these. They look like normal people, except they can shoot blood out of their eyes, and they think that they're totally normal. They don't realize that anything weird has happened, but they can sense when someone is not infected, and they start trying to crawl after you and kill you. It's very zombie-like. This whole world takes place on London Bridge, which is highly overgrown with buildings. This creates a kind of a weird city crawl or dungeon crawl like experience, which I quite like. There's a system here for bridge crawling where you can use playing cards to create the buildings that are on London Bridge as you move back and forth across it. You can also move up into upper stories, cross over bridges to the other side of the road, and so forth. A Wilder Wilderness, an alternate world where humans never evolved, and so North America is covered with giant megafauna. Pits of the Mirror Drake, which takes place in 1890 Virginia near Richmond. And one of the alien creatures has gotten through the portal into this area and has transformed itself into a giant mirrored dragon, which the people of 1890 are dealing with. It has decimated the city, it has taken over City Hall, and the army is coming in to destroy it. Can you loot the city before that happens? Ninth world is the Susurrant Voids. This is just empty space, so you can be catapulted into deep space. You'll die pretty quick if that happens, although it could be a way to dispose of large creatures that might be following you. In the Shadow of the Creeper, where the world has been taken over by mobile plants. You have Otterworld, which is an alternate world where all of the people in North America never came here from Asia. Instead, otters evolved into sentient creatures and now populate the entire continent. The 12th world is the Corpse Kingdom of the Western Gate. This is the location in China 200 years in the future that caused all of these problems to start with. This place is highly dangerous, but also allows for a lot of interactivity and for you to really get a handle on what is going on here and what caused all this. Is there a way you can turn back time and set things right? Is there a way to kill these aliens, send them on their way? Can you prevent this from ever happening at all? Really hard to say, but there's so many tools and weird effects and magic scattered throughout this that I'm sure players will find some combination to make that happen. Or more likely, they'll just make things even worse. If the Corpse Kings actually finish their antenna, the rescuer might lift the fort along with everything in a 800-mile sphere surrounding it, then deposit them in a 5-dimensional universe. Death ensues not only for those transported, but also for anyone else on this Earth, as the giant hole scooped from inside it releases a tsunami of magma to cover the planet. Our final book is Prodigies, Monsters, and Index. This covers mostly just the weird creatures that you're going to discover here, along with some of the new spells. Most of the spells are ones created by Dr. Trephysis as part of his investigations into magic. Some of them are pretty funny, like Mathemic Decountancy. This spell allows the caster to hide errors of manipulation of arithmetic, allows you to forge books. So you can't tell very clearly if someone made a mistake when they were keeping track of their taxes and their income and so forth. Great if you're a trader, which he is. For example, this one enables a caster to prepare a bogus letter that exempts the bearer from duties, tariffs, and other fees related to import and export. There's also a number of spells for Powhatan clerics and new people. These are the weird pseudo people. They're bodies that have been taken on by the servants of the aliens after their ship crash landed. And they are kind of like human beings, but there's always something very weird about them. And they always have very alien intentions and goals. Perhaps they want to copy the adventurer's DNA, or eat one of the humans, or receive protection from them. Their greater goals might be things like closing the warp, or converting the Earth into a garden, or domesticating humans as livestock. By rolling on these random tables, you can create all sorts of different bands of new people, each of which have different ideologies and goals and appearances, so that every time you meet them, it's a whole new weird experience. Here's the bestiary itself: the air sturgeon, the amber tree ghost. They all have really fun names. The ambulant malescription, blood crawlers from the city of the crawling blood, the Chimus remembrancer. You have a citizen of the crawling blood, the Corpse Kings themselves. There's a whole bunch of these, and they are quite powerful and each get extended write-ups, like the axial reverberator, or the colonic reducer, the incinerator cranioraptor, the merciful deincarnatrix. One thing I wish the book did is give little short descriptions of the monsters back in the second book when you first come across them in the location descriptions. A lot of times it'll just say, you meet a flesh crystallizer, or you meet a fractal, however you say that, without a lot of description of what it actually is that you're seeing. You have to flip to this book to figure out what that is. It'd be nice if the books at least give you a little bit of a summary the first time you interact with them, just to help you get a better picture. The headless monoceros, the hoop millipede can roll away like a wheel, the hoverdoe and her pugnacious parcel. Just like the weirdest creatures. The illuminoid, it's 5 feet tall and absorbs all light, so our picture is just a black square. You might meet the manual dogs, which is a hive mind of dogs that can protrude a hand or an arm out of its mouth that it can use to manipulate stuff. That's a fun idea. The physician skunk. There's plenty of animals that you can talk to, which I like. Kind of a Wind in the Willows or Winnie the Pooh-like situation where you can assume that a lot of the animals are just going to talk to you and you can have a chat with them, mostly because they've been mutated by the warp. But that just creates more social encounters, which is always good in a hex crawl. The quartzite ambler, the querulous plasm, the reef snake. Most of these monsters are one of a kind, which is kind of a principle in Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And it's nice to have a big bestiary like this, because Lamentation doesn't really have one. Maybe each adventure has one weird monster, and this book is packed with weird ideas. Taker of the Last Born, the Tensor Pseudo-Spider, Trophylactic Egress, Tunnel Husk, Unextinct Megafauna. Just lots of good stuff. This book just has so many of the tropes of weird science fiction, weird fantasy, classic Lamentation stuff, that you could just loot it for ideas if you wanted to, or run it as an extended campaign and give your players the treat of seeing kind of everything that Lamentations has to offer packed into one dense campaign. Another point in its favor, I think, is that while it is often still very gross and has a lot of weird body horror and stuff, in general, I would say it is pretty toned down versus a lot of the most disturbing stuff that Lamentations has put out in the past, where its goal is to really freak out the players and kind of scare away the normies. This book is really not in that vein, and I think it would be better suited to a more typical group of D&D players, although of course altered based on what your group likes. So that's it for our look through of A True Relation of the Great Virginia Disastrum, 1633. There is a ton of information and content in these 3 books. I was barely able to skim the surface and keep things within a somewhat reasonable time frame. But hopefully you've gotten a good sense of what's in this book and the vibe that it has and the kind of adventure that it's trying to provide for you. If you want to pick it up for yourself, the links are, as usual, down in the description below, whether you want to get it in PDF or in print form. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.